Okay. Okay, welcome everybody. I'll call this meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. This is a joint meeting with the school board and the Matsu Borough Assembly for Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Tim Hale is running a little late. Stephanie Nowers. Here. George McKee may or may not be present. Robert Yunt.
Here.
Moki Tu.
Here.
Jessie Sumner.
Here.
Tam Bovey. Here. Thomas Berge.
Here.
Jim Hart, are you on the phone?
I am.
Thank you. Ole Larson.
Here.
Sarah Welton.
Here.
Ryan Ponder will not be present. Dwight Probasco.
Here.
And Jeff Taylor, are you on the phone? Mr. Mayor, you do have a quorum of both bodies.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved as presented. Now for the Pledge of Allegiance, are you students from Houston High School? Go Hawks! Good day. All right. Well, could I ask you to stand and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please, the students? There's the flag right over here, so go ahead and lead us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There you go. See, that's what happens when you sit in the front row. Okay, but welcome. Thanks for coming, students. We appreciate it. So, okay, audience participation. We have a list here. It's your chance to speak to the joint school board and assembly. And if we have telephonic, we'll take those also 3 minutes. And if you are calling in telephonic, you will hear your hand has been raised. You will know it's your turn to testify when you hear your line has been unmuted.
Mr. Mayor, first they have to hit *3. So if you're on the phone and want to participate in audience participation, press *3.
Okay. I think I was supposed to say that, but thank you. Okay, let's start with our, is it Cole Taylor? Do you want to speak? You got, everybody's going to come up together. So we'll turn up, there we go. Go ahead, please. Just state your name.
My name's Bre Reinsma, and I'm here with some of my fellow classmates. We're all sophomores who currently attend Houston High School, and we wanted to speak on behalf on all of our students on how we need to have our new school built now. So we currently have 13 portables that house all of the middle school, which can get a little crazy and cramped. And not to mention it's really cold outside in the winter. And the bathroom out there is a trailer and it's not working right now, which means they have to come inside to use the bathroom, which gets even more crowded. Also, high school's only PE choice is weight training because the middle school is using the gym. So we can't do like sports activities like we were used to be able to do. We just have to stick in the weight room. Also, practice schedules for both schools have to happen in the same gym, which means they run really late in the night, especially for the high school, because we usually practice after. And we're using the smallest gym in the district. So that gets really crowded too. And it's just kind of like a nightmare to figure out like schedules. And we also have counseling sessions that are held in storage closets, which it gets like when you're trying to be counseled and you're in a storage closet. Yeah. We've been waiting for a new school for 2.5 years, and most of us graduate in the next 2. And we have 11-year-old sixth graders hanging out with 18-year-old seniors in the hallway. This needs to happen now so we can finish out high school in a normal school environment. Yeah, that's basically all we wanted to say. Thank you for your time.
My name is Cole Taylor.
I'm Hayden Howard.
My name is Brandon Heine.
I'm Deegan Van Dusen.
Okay, all straight A's, Susan?
Yeah, pretty much.
Thank you, students, for coming. We appreciate it. Mayor Virgie Thompson. Is she here? There she is. I don't have my glasses on, so I didn't spot you back there.
All right, is this on? It is. I'm sorry. Good evening, Honorable Assembly and School Board members and Superintendent Trainee. For the record, my name is Virgie Thompson, Mayor of Houston, 33-year resident of Houston, and 30-year school district employee. I would like to thank all who have worked very hard on the Houston Middle School Retrofit School project. Special thanks to Borough Manager Mike Brown and Project Manager Jeff Walden. Mr. Brown has been on this project from the beginning since November 2018, approximately 850 days ago. This project has been and is more complicated than many understand. Could more information have been shared? Yes. Are there areas that should not be shared? Of course. My goal by testifying tonight, along with my Hawk peers sitting behind me, is to hear that the Mat-Su-Borough and the Mat-Su-Borough School District have come to an agreement to find, transfer, or amend budgets to allocate and complete the Houston Middle School retrofit project. It is my opinion that our students, staff, and community have been more than patient. Our students, staff, community deserve a new school. Our students deserve a safe, warm, real classroom environment to learn. We have made it work as we have no other options. Once again, thank you to the school board members and assembly members who have been in full support of this project from the start. In closing, Mr. Mayor and Superintendent Trainee, sorry for the short, loud disruption, but every morning at Houston Junior Senior High School, we say the pledge. We get an update on current events and activities, and we plan our school day, and we close with, Go Hawks. Go Hawks! So I asked my fellow Hawks to help me out. Go Hawks!
Okay. I know. Okay, let's take a look. Adam Ames.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I don't know if I'll do any better than the high schoolers. Nice job, by the way. I'm a 7th grade math teacher at Houston Junior Senior High School, and I'm here tonight to give you kind of a personal view of what it's like to teach middle schoolers in a portable. First of all, it's not great. Josie mentioned the bathroom situation. In the beginning of the school year, we had a restroom outside that we could use. We didn't have to go into the building. We didn't have to wait for other students, but it froze up. So you can't go in there. I mean, you can, but if you use the restroom, things just don't flow quite like they're supposed to. And so, yeah, that's not working out. There's long lines in the building, as she mentioned. So a student will leave my class, and I have no idea how long it's going to take. And it's legitimately long for them. It's not like they're getting lost on the way. Well, that happens too, right? But if they're honestly trying to go quickly and there's a line there, they just have to wait, or they have to wander around and find another restroom. My classroom is cold. I've got the thermostat up, the heaters kick on, and I can't even hear the students. They're like quiet voices, they're timid. It's a math class, right? And they're middle schoolers. And some of them are really worried about it. They're uncomfortable being there, but the heater kicks on. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can you please speak up? 2 or 3 times. It's not great. It's not safe either. One day there, a student fell and broke his elbow. On the same day, a teacher fell and smacked his head against the brick corner of our building. He was outside, it was slippery. Our maintenance crew, our custodians, they're doing great with snow removal. But you can't make a hallway, you can't make a sidewalk in the wintertime as safe as you can make a hallway inside a school building. The messages that we're hearing at Houston are not encouraging. I've heard, oh, we should just build something out of logs, or they're fine the way they are. It's not fine the way it is. The messages that we're hearing there is that we don't matter like the other schools in the valley. They have a high school. They have what they need. And we're stuck in these portables, and it's just not great. So please, do what you can do to make the situation improve for us, for our students, for our community. We would love to offer small engines. We'd love to offer all of the programs that a high school should be offering, but we don't have the space. And now we're busing kids down to Reddington. And please, do what you can do to improve this for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam Ames. And Assemblymember McKee arrived at 6:10 p.m. Welcome down there. Oh, excuse me. Rick Taylor.
Mr. Mayor, this is Tim Hale. I'm on the telephone right now.
Okay, where are you located, Mr. Hale?
I'm almost to the assembly chambers, but I am listening in by telephone.
Okay, so you're on the way. Okay, thank you. Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Can I address you without the mask?
please.
I just want to say thank you for this opportunity, and thank you all, the Borough Assembly and the school board as well, for serving in these capacities and for offering this forum to us to be heard. My name is Rick Taylor, and I'm here to share some thoughts regarding the Houston High School project, as the students and others that have spoke so eloquently shared. I'm a parent of high school students and graduates. I'm also the product of Houston High School. In fact, the school I attended is the one that was destroyed in the earthquake. My wife and I are part of the Community Advisory Board working with the Rebuild Project. It's been a pleasure to work with Mike Brown, formerly of the school district, and the team that was assembled. Great things were accomplished in the planning process. I have some questions for you all to ponder. What would happen if your house got shook apart or burned down? What would happen if your business got shook apart or burned down? What would happen if this building got shook apart or burned down? I guarantee in all three examples, it would be taken care of quickly. It wasn't long ago that Governor Dunleavy made a statement about the Kaktovik school that burned up on the North Slope. He made a statement about it, roughly saying, this school will be rebuilt, and it was. We haven't received this treatment from him, but we shouldn't have to. We here could offer that. It seems to be a pattern that we build these architectural masterpieces for replacing schools that have been outgrown or that are showing signs of degradation. Many examples are out there. Iditarod looks like an aquarium equipped with an LED light show. It's not necessary, and it's not what's been asked for by us at Houston. What does Houston want? Simply a functional building, no light shows, no massive walls of windows, nothing special, just a place to learn at a modern pace with educational choices. Also, a gym and common spaces that are actually built for a high school. It's been said that everybody at Houston seems to be doing fine. This may be the case currently, but how much longer can the students and staff continue to fight through the difficulties and adversity? Many changes were brought about following the earthquake, beneficial changes in the administration and staffing, and others. If it wasn't for this, we wouldn't be where we are today. But how long can they hold out and stay strong? Houston has suffered enough. The kids have suffered enough. I propose we park a portable restroom trailer out in front of this building and at the school district as well, if needed, for you all to use, and one at a time, because COVID. That would be a great start for us to experience just a piece of what the students and staff get to experience on a daily basis, for starters anyway. It's not that we can't do better, it's that we can't do worse. It's time. This is when we switch from thinking with our options and statutes and use that thing we call a heart. I hope this is the last you have to hear from us. The ball's in your court, because heaven knows We don't have one. I hope you all do the right thing starting now. Please work together with the school district and accomplish this special project. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's dispense with the clapping and we'll just take the testimony. So Sherry Rusher.
You always have this thing up too high. You know that? Good evening, school board members, assembly, and mayor. My first student graduated from Houston High School in 1991. My last grandchild will graduate in 2026. My experiences during those past years were good. I am here tonight as a community member concerned about the education of our youth. You are not responsible for the earthquake nor COVID-19. You are responsible for fixing the damages caused by both. The students, staff, parents, and community members waited patiently while you tried to figure out what to do. We lived through let's rebuild, let's repair, let's rebuild the academic wing and repair the administrative and gym section. This decision took way longer than it should have. All got behind the final decision to rebuild and then waited even longer. What we hear from the school district is the burden is on the borough. What we hear from the borough is the wait for FEMA. FEMA says nothing. Everyone is passing the responsibility on to each other. Ultimately, this is a school and thus the school board's duty. Our students have suffered through frozen bathrooms since Thanksgiving. Access to a bathroom in a public school in the Mat-Su should be considered a basic human right. They have endured severe problems with scheduling due to lack of classrooms, gym use, and even lunch hours. Counseling is happening in a closet. Distance learning just doesn't compare to a classroom education. It is not working and continues to be a requirement due to lack of classrooms. The sacrifices go on, both in extracurricular activities and in educational activities. There is an unstated fear that complaining too much about the conditions will result in the school board shutting the school down and going to complete distance learning. That's not good. The school board's decision to delay funding and thus the letting of the bid for reconstruction is one more insult to our students, parents, staff, and community. And they are great students, staff, and parents. You have the money, take the right action. The community residents pay property taxes, which support our schools. We deserve the same facilities and educational opportunities as any other school in the district. My frustration is probably obvious. As a school board, you may not want to step out of your lane, as you stated this morning, but the earthquake and COVID didn't choose a lane. They went down all of them. It's time for you to take the necessary steps and fund the project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming. Patty Fisher.
This is in the right spot, 2 shorties in a row. I want to encourage this group, the assembly and the school board, to come together and fund the remaining balance for rebuilding Houston Middle School. This means working together to find a solution to this problem, not just standing back and pointing fingers and saying the responsibility belongs to the other side. It is generally known that the school district has the funding to complete the project. So why are there so many excuses? I encourage you to stand up and do what the public voted you into office to do, and that's get the job done.
Thank you. Let's switch to telephonic. Are there telephonic callers? No telephonic. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak on the assembly and the school board? Come on out. We only meet once a quarter. There we go. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, now I gotta change it. My name is Jessie Laird. I am a high school and middle school teacher at Houston Junior Senior. I am a shop teacher. This year is my first year, so I transferred directly in from industry. So I can speak from kind of an industry standpoint when I can say that we need people. We need people turning wrenches. We need people doing what's got to be done in our industry. And breathe. And I did have the opportunity to visit Colony's shop, and they have a very nice facility and things are working great over there. And I hope that we can have something similar for our students. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for coming in. Anyone else wish to speak? Any telephonics? Okay, we've got somebody coming forward. Welcome.
Thank you. So my name is Bre Reinsma, and I didn't plan to speak, but I have the luxury of wearing two hats. I'm an assistant principal at Houston, and I'm also the mom of that amazing kid there who got up. And if she's brave enough to do it, her mom should too, right?
Which one is your son?
Nope, it's my daughter.
Oh,
The only
daughter, excuse
girl.
me.
Yeah.
I thought you had four
Holding
sons
it
there.
down. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, she has been to these meetings many times. I've been a principal for a while. So I just really want to stress what I hear often when I'm out in the public. This is my first year at Houston, right? I was at Big Lake for 18 years and amazing school. And I never wanted to leave until this position came open, right? Because Houston, it's amazing. My kids go there. All the kids are wonderful, right? The staff are great. But what I hear often is, well, we're making it work, right? Houston's doing a good job. They're making it work because our kids don't complain. Our parents don't complain. But the truth is, we are running that building into the ground. Last week, we didn't have water for a couple hours, so nobody could go to the restroom, right? Maintenance came right over because the district takes great care of us, right? But when you have 600 so kids shoved into a building that was not designed for that, right? Eventually, systems start to, fail and break down a little bit. So I really hope tonight that you guys can do the right thing. And I don't know whose responsibility is, right? I go to all the meetings and I listen, but the truth is it doesn't matter, right? Because we have to face these kids every day and they deserve better, right? So I just implore you, whether as citizens or parents, that we can do better for these kids, right? They are amazing kids and they need every opportunity that every kid in this district has. And that just means more room, adequate space, right? Some of our kids practice till 9, 10 o'clock at night because they can't get court time. And that's not good for them either, right? So anyway, thank you for your time tonight. And I really hope you consider our request.
Thank you. I think the students are lucky to have you too. So.
I love them.
Anyone else wish to speak? Come on forward.
Honorable Mayor, members of the Assembly, the school board. Once again, we thank you for your service. We have a lot of good people sitting on these two boards. And we know you're all committed to figuring out how to build this thing. And there's some important negotiations going on, some posturing, maybe a little bit of poker. But if we could just lock you in a room till you came out with the solution, we'd be happy because we know you're all committed to figuring it out. But please don't roll the dice and posture too hard. This thing gets pushed off. We know that if you have pardon the phrase, if there's some in the room, a bad teacher, it can set you back a little. If you have 2 in 2 years in a row, it starts to have longer term effects. When you start putting rats together, the next year that this thing could be delayed it grows in the long-term problems. And it's really a risk that none of us want you to take. We want you to honestly look at each other's side, look at what they're saying, look at how the funding is. Give it full credit what the other guys are saying. Don't embellish your side and work it out for the sake of the school. I think when Sioux Valley burned, I'm told that they rebuilt that without the money. They went out to bid without having all the money or something. I don't know if that's true. It's not true. They had it figured out. Okay, well, contractor told me they would. But you've got the money. The last time they built Houston High School was the last year. They went with the low bid. And they figured low bid means any contract, and $1,200 separated a real experienced contract. We ended up with the lawsuits and everything. Now we built Iditarod and a bunch of other schools with this value bidding. Now we're back to Houston. We're going to go on low dollar. So don't double gamble, because we don't want to get back and, just figure it out and get it done. Thank you.
Can you say your name for the record? Madam Clerk likes to get that on the.
Robert Hall, Houston, Alaska.
Thank you very much. I'll tell you this, Mr. Hall, playing poker with FEMA is not that much fun. But anyone else wish to speak to the Assembly and School Board? Is there any telephonics? No telephonics? Last call. Okay, we'll close audience participation at this time, and we'll go into our joint items of business. Annual budget and bonding for schools. I'll turn this over to Superintendent Training.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm kind of sitting in for Mr. Fulp. I do believe he's online, exact presentation that we gave last week. So I will go quickly, but please feel free to ask questions either at the end or as they come up. I'm going to share the mic today with Ms. Gardner behind me, one of my associate superintendents, so she'll take over halfway through so you don't have to listen to me the whole time. So this is our adopted preliminary budget. Let's see if I can make this work. There we are. We're breaking it into 4 different parts: an overview, a revenue. We're breaking it into 4 different parts: an overview, a revenue, expenses, and then some long-term planning discussion. So we'll move right into the budget development calendar. You can see that we are in March, and there's a red box there. The preliminary budget is transmitted to the borough. In April, it needs to, by state law, it has to go to the state legislature. Later in April, the borough sets minimum amount to be available to the district, and then hopefully by June, the school board budget is adopted. I won't spend much time going through that. I do want to look at this next slide, which is average daily membership over time. The light blue are the district's projections, and the dark blue is the actual. And you can see that the district has a fairly good track record of being awfully close. And when you think about that, predicting what your enrollment's going to be many months out, it's both an art and a science. And then you can see that when you throw a worldwide pandemic in 2021, our predictions were considerably off, which makes next year questionable too. And I'm going to talk about that. The art and science of how we predict average daily membership in the past is on this slide. So you can see, and I'll read through it very quickly. We move all of the grades at each school site, and we assume 100% cohort survival. We establish our kindergarten enrollment by analyzing live birth rate data that we get from the state. And then we have a cohort survival rate. This is item 3, is calculated for each grade level at every school by averaging the percent change over the 2 prior years. That rate is then applied to the incoming class. This is what we've modified, number 3, I'll show you on the next slide, based on COVID. And it's really our best guess, but we don't have any historical data to back it up. So number 4, grade level projections at every school are combined, providing for aggregate district-wide totals, and then economic trends and other factors are considered. If, say, there's a housing boom, we would consider something like that. But COVID happened, so we've from lost enrollment at each grade at every school due to COVID, excluding correspondence. So I'm going to jump back 2 slides. You can see that on that year, the 2021, we in correspondence. So I'm going to jump back 2 slides. You can see that on that year, the 2021, we predicted north of 19,000, like 200 students, and we've come in considerably less than that. We're predicting that 75% of those kids that were not in school this year are going to come back. So that does provide a little more uncertainty than normal in our budgeting going forward. So there you can see the actual number. So this year, if we look at 2021, we're saying we had 17,900 and we're budgeting for 19,135 based on those other metrics and that 75% return rate. It's important to look at our average daily membership because that's the prime driver of the funds that we receive at the state level. It's the main multiplier in the formula. And so we use that number to prepare a preliminary budget that we presented to the board earlier this year. And then we had to modify that to make a balanced budget. So the next slide, preliminary budget that we presented on February 3rd to the most recent budget that we presented to the board this year, or this month, excuse me, and the budget that we presented to you. So on the revenue adjustments, you can see that to balance our budget, we're using 4.51 million of our ending fund balance. So I'll say that again. To make us have a balanced budget, we needed to use $4.5 million of our funding balance for next year. We also added some E-rate funds that were not calculated in the first budget, about 0.94 million. But you'll see right underneath that in expenditures, we had to add some expenditures too from our first budget to our second budget. And you'll see an expenditure of 1.34 million. E-rate is calculated as we receive 70% of the revenue back for everything that we spend on E-rate. And it just had been omitted, from the first budget. Traditionally in our budget, we have 10 hold teachers. Those are basically teachers that we budget for and we don't know where we will use them. So for instance, this year, we didn't have as many teachers at Matsu Central as we needed because COVID happened and we had many more folks decide to take advantage of that kind of education. So we were able to move teachers into that. So typically we budget for 10. We reduced our budget by half to 5 hold teachers in order to balance it. We also reduced 4 SPED teachers to balance our budget. There's a little teeny adjustment of ESSER 2 funds. The payroll reserve fund was a change of 1.03 million. Normally, we hold in reserve 1% of payroll, and we reduced that to 0.5, so 0.5%. And then the other big moving factor from the first preliminary budget to the one that the board actually approved to move on to you folks was 47.26 FTE to the ESSER 2 fund. So these are the most recent rounds of funds from the federal government. It's going to support 47.26 FTE next year. Or another way to look at it is if we didn't have those ESSER 2 funds, we'd either have to lay off 47.26 teachers or we would need to use more out of our ending fund balance. Everything I explained is summarized on this page with lots and lots and lots of numbers. So the first column is the FY 2021 revised budget. Then we have the FY 22 initial budget. And then we have the third column, which is the preliminary budget. And so like you can see, if you look at the deficit in the middle column, the FY 2022 initial budget. In our initial budget, when we rolled everything up, we had an $8.356 million deficit. And we had to address that in order to present you folks with a balanced budget. And we did it by doing those things on the previous slide. Or I can try to highlight those changes here. I've changed the slide slightly, and we have some call outs. So you can see where the E-rate category 2 funding went up. You can see the next blue box is us using that fund balance. So we appropriated $4.5 million of fund balance, et cetera. So we rolled this year up. We had an $8.3 million problem. We made some adjustments primarily through using the ESSER funds and using fund balance to balance our budget. And that's what's being presented to you. The next section is revenue. There's lots of pictures here to try to make this more reasonable. You can see that the total preliminary revenue is about $243 million. The borough, thank you, is appropriated about 27% of our funding. The huge percentage of our state funding, the majority, though, of course, is state funding at a little more than 70%. And you can see fund balance, that's that $4.5 million, the red piece of the pie, and then there's some other small portion. So by far, our two biggest revenue sources are, of course, the state and the borough. We have some revenue assumptions built into this budget. We've assumed that the borough appropriations will maintain at 6.3 mils of the tax base, and that there's a 5.67% increase to the tax base from 2021. We're assuming that state funding is maintained and that there won't be an increase to the BSA, and it will stay at $5,930. We're assuming a hold harmless factor applied at 0.5, and that has to do with the number of students that we lost from last year to this year, and then from this year to next year. We're assuming that if we're below that number, we will get 50% of the allocation that we would have normally got were those students here. The year after that, it would drop to 0.25. This, we're assuming a little bit of revenue from lottery, no additional one-time funds. Federal funding includes categories 1 and 2 for E-rate reimbursement, and all other funding will be maintained with no increases. So since the borough is one of our major sources of revenue, we're trying to show the borough funding history over the last 10 years. As you know, boroughs have a minimum amount that they are required by state law to fund each district, and then they also have a maximum amount. So those are represented on this graph by the red line on the top. That's the maximum that the borough could fund the district, and the grayish line is the minimum. And thank you that you have done much more than the minimum requirement for many, many years. And the percentage that you've been giving us, not the percentage, the overall dollars have increased consistently over time, which is especially helpful since our other major funding source, the state of Alaska, has maintained a flat funding for several years. The next graph is that same information, just differently, and comparing the big 5 school districts. So Anchorage, Mat-Su, Fairbanks, Kenai, and Juneau. The bar is the maximum amount that they could fund. And the way I understand it, it's my first year in the Valley, that Mat-Su has now has gone past Fairbanks for the first time in some time. So thank you. The next one is a horrible supposition, at least from our standpoint. We all know that there was nothing that any of you did or that any of the school board did with bond debt reimbursement. The state had a long history of funding 100% of bond debt reimbursement, and that has recently changed, and it's been put into your laps. And so our next slide is what would happen if the bond debt reimbursement were shuttled on to the district. And so look, it's the same graph as last time, except for FY 2022. That bond debt reimbursement, that 17 million-ish dollars, if suddenly the school district had to take it out of the allotment that you give us, it would drop us down considerably, which I know that you all know. So this is a horrible supposition, and we'll get off that slide as quickly as possible. If that were to have happened, which hopefully it doesn't, then we would take over the last place amongst the big five, and considerably so. So I guess this is our slide saying, please don't do that. The next slide is the mill rate attribution to the district over time. And I know that I've already heard the 6.3 mills for a while at this meeting, and it's been that way, we assume, for 4 years, assuming it's that way next year. That kind of gives the district certainty in planning, and we really appreciate that. Last slide before I pass it over to Ms. Gardner. This is that same slide that we just saw, and what would happen if the district had to take on that burden of repaying all the bond debt. So with that, I'm going to ask Ms. Gardner to come up. I certainly can. Yeah.
Take a few questions now.
Sure. We can take questions now or at the end, either way.
Turn your light. Hold it. There you go.
I'm looking at the data you put out here. And I've sat here for a while. Now, in July, the school district received a $4.3 million CARES share. In December, they had a 15.9, I think it was 15.9, 50 million and change after all. Addition, okay, that's in addition to the funding provided by the borough. Additionally, on the 31st of December, your fund balance was $23 million. That's $42 million above the amount that you asked for, and we gave you this last year. Nowhere in here do I see that extraneous money that's just been thrown at you. Okay? Tell me, why are you even talking about this? You have $42 million you didn't ask for.
Yeah, good question, Member McKee. Let me see if I can go back and show you a portion of it. Let me get back here. So the four point, I can't remember how much million that they received initially in the initial federal bailout dollars. As I understood it, that funded 20-something positions this year in the district. And the way I understand it is the budget, those positions would have either needed to be spent out of ending fund balance or cut were it not for those federal dollars. It's the same thing that I tried to show here, but I didn't do a very good job of it. The bottom number on this slide, the 47.26 FTE to ESSER 2 funds, the next, the $15.8 million, it's funding all of those positions next year. And the following year. Additionally, a significant portion of that money, I think around $3 million goes to the charter schools, so it's not accounted for in this. It's their money to spend as they see fit. But really, the money is being spent to fund current positions. We aren't adding positions. If those federal dollars hadn't come in, we'd either be looking at two choices: reduce the positions or take it out of the remaining ending fund balance, which I think you noted was around 23.
Here to us is this, that in fact, the budget you gave us last year was no good, that it didn't fully fund what you needed. And that the CARES money, if you hadn't had that, you had had to lose $41 million and lay off all these teachers. Is that what you're saying to us?
Well, I'm not sure how you're getting to 41 million because it was initially a number around 4 million and then 15.8. And we do know that there's going to be a third round, but we don't know what that number is yet. But I think you're hitting in a deficit spending mode. And to the fault of the borough, because I tried to point that out, that the amount of money that you have been giving us over time has gone up for 10 years. Unfortunately, our main provider of revenue, the state, has remained flat. So we've been in a deficit funding mode, and there's been, I think Larson could tell you all this, without one-time monies that have come up, these cuts would have needs that have come up. These cuts would have needed to happen. Luckily, we've had like 2 rounds of federal bailout. Now we're protecting 47 plus positions in the district.
Okay. Mr. Sumner?
Wait a minute, hold it. So
your
you're
time's
telling
about
me, I got one question. So you're saying that these 41 positions used $41 million?
No, I don't think it isn't. It's not 41 million. It was 15.8, and a portion of which goes to the charter schools, and an initial 4. Is that the right number? 3.99. Yeah, 3.99 million. So if you take 15.8 and let's subtract 3 for the charter schools, we're at, let's say 13 plus 4, 17 million. So that 17 million is using to support positions this year, as well as next year and the next year.
Sumner, then Mr. Yount.
So I think what Assemblymember McKee is trying to say is that at least every year I've been here, the school district comes forward and they present us a budget and they say they're running a deficit. And then every year we get their CAFR and they actually built more unrestricted fund balance. So that would be a surplus in actuality. Is there any reason to believe that this year is different in that regard?
Yeah. I know that President Larson was lamenting this problem that we've had. And remember, I've been here for 1 year, so I've only got to see 1.5 of these problems. One-time dollars, we couldn't have possibly budgeted for a $15.8 million infusion in December. Nobody knew it was coming. And we certainly didn't know that there was even going to be another round coming up. So I think the most basic answer is there have been many one-time events sequentially over the last 3, 4, 5 years that have caused that to go up. I know that one of them, I wasn't here for it, so I'll probably have the details off. The district was in the budgeting cycle. The governor had proposed a fairly massive cut. The district budgeted for that massive cut. And then in the end, the legislature didn't cut it as that much. So there was suddenly more revenue than they had budgeted for. I think that's what started the ending fund balance going up. And then these other one-time federal bailout dollars. So will it happen again? I don't know. And then these other one-time federal bailout dollars. So will it happen again? I don't know.
I've heard that this latest round you guys will be receiving will be around the order of $38 million. So if we add that to the 15 and the 5, and I believe the borough transferred 5.9, was it, to the school district? I mean, what exactly are you guys?
It was the other way around.
The other way around.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
well,
we transport
good thing.
5.9 to you.
Well, no, we actually did allocate CARES money, but then we reduced the appropriation, I think, but so it was neutral. But what exactly are you guys going to spend all of that money on?
Let me jump in.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear it.
Oh, let me go ahead and jump in real quick, and then you can continue. We allocated 5.9 to start the Houston project up that the borough did not have. Came right out of our reserve. The reserve's been built totally on one-time monies, not out of our operation, except for what Dr. Trainey was talking about when the state talked about major cuts and when the state talked about zeroing out the bond money. We went into a hiring freeze, and we also cut a lot of discretionary spending in the spring, which left a lot of money into the one that went into our reserve. We are working on a deficit mode because of contracts that we have led. The last 4 contracts, union contracts, put us in about $28 million in the hole. And the one-time money, I mean, the flat BSA, we figure we're about $2 million a year in deficit because no increase from the state. Every year we lose. We're in a deficit mode. The one-time or the reserve is all one-time money that we planned on using to fund forward CTE programs and possibly a preschool and some other programs the next 10 years or so. Obviously, that's not going to happen, it looks like, because we've already loaned out 5.9 million to you, to Borough, which doesn't look like it's going to come back. And we get punished, it seems like, because we have a reserve, because we just don't spend our reserve down to nothing on foolish projects. That we look into the future to spend our funds to bring up scores. That's what we got a new superintendent for, and to create CT programs that are very necessary for this district, which will cost money. But since that reserve is always looked at as, you've got all this money, you've got all this money, our reserve will be cut down over the next 3 years to fund the money that we are in the hole for the last contracts that we did with our union and the flat BSA. We are not plush with money.
Mr. Yount, I think you're up.
I was just trying to make sure the clerk seen Jessie had a question.
Pardon? Okay, Ms. Nowers?
Thank you. Through the mayor, I think we're actually in a uniquely good situation, and we can find a solution to get the school funded. So I'm looking forward to that. I did have a couple questions on the revenue assumptions slide that you showed. It's got number 14, has the page number on it. It's got your 5.67% increase to the tax base. It's got some of the assumptions. There.
That page?
Curious about, I thought that our tax base increased by 7%, is what's in my head. So I'm just wondering anyways, how you get to 5.67.
Our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Heindel.
Through the mayor to Assembly Member Nowers, the 5.67 is what our increase was once we take out senior and disabled vet and other exemptions. Yes, overall our tax base grew, but not our taxable base.
Thank you. And then the one other question I had, which is about the BSA, the hold harmless factor. So it looked like the hope is the student population comes back up. And I'm trying to figure out if you could walk me through how much of a dollar impact you see that having. If your student population actually is back up to normal, are you going to be penalized in any way?
Yeah, if our population is back up above what we were, we wouldn't realize any money in that hold harmless if we had got back above the base year. So in this, because we think we're going to end up higher, it won't add anything to it. If we end up lower than that, like if we're wrong on our 70% return rate, 75% return rate, the free fall won't be, it'll be softened, I guess, because you'd still receive a half per student who didn't return. Does that make sense?
It sort of does, but if you can you give me a kind of dollar figure of those two scenarios if you do end up where you think you're going to be? And I mean, are we talking about $1 million, $500,000, just ballpark?
Yeah, let me look really.
Where's Mr. Fope when you need him?
I know. If he texts you the answer, you let me know.
Okay. We can come back to it if
Okay.
you want to continue.
Yeah, I'll look at it and give you an estimate. Yeah, just give me a couple minutes afterwards. We'll try to come up with a number.
Check with Mr. Fope and let's let the school district finish their presentation and then we'll take up more questions. Thank you, Dr. Training.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor Halter, President Larson, members of the Assembly and School Board. For the record, my name is Catherine Gardner, a poor substitute for Mr. Fulp this evening, but I appreciate the opportunity to share some information with you, particularly regarding the expenditure budget for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022. So I will steal from Dr. Trainee, thank you, the clicker. And get back on track here. So as you can see, we have initially broken down sort of the general areas of expenditure for the school district, and typical for school districts across the country. We are a primarily human resources business, and as you see here, 82% of our expenditures for school districts across the country. We are a primarily human resources business, and as you see here, 82% of our expenditures go to individuals, both salaries and benefits. Just under $200 million is what we're projecting for that for next year. In addition, the other major areas of our budget, we have a 10% in non-personnel expenditures, which are supplies, materials, curricular needs for students. We also have $7 million, just under $8 million, for district managed expenses. For example, these are items that are managed at the district level and aren't necessarily associated with a particular facility or building. These are things such as leases, property insurance, recycling, certain bank fees, snow removal, software licenses, those items that are really managed at the district level. In addition, we have a little under $10 million that's budgeted for utilities. And then finally, in taking away from revenue, we do have a $2.6 million projection for transfers to other funds. So to talk a little bit about how we determine these figures and walk through some of the assumptions, obviously with a budget this size, there are a number of factors that we know and project and some that we have to make some assumptions regarding. Personnel expenditures, of course, and taking up a major portion of the budget. Also, we have a lot of time that we spend in trying to estimate a level of collective bargaining. For FY22, we do have agreements in place with both our two largest unions, the Matsu Education Association and Classified Employees Association, and those increases are 2% and 1.5% respectively on the salary schedule. The other collective bargaining units within the district, we don't have contracts in place for them for next year, so we're not assuming any level of increase there as we go through the bargaining process. We also, our salary schedules have regular movement that is pretty common in school districts and also just in other industries in Alaska. And we actually take the individual salaries for each position based on a certain date and move those people forward. So while the average works out to be 1.36% for certificated salaries and 3.3% for non-certificated salaries, it's not a straight average that we're applying to all of those expenditures. We're actually doing the work of taking all eligible individuals and applying their new contracted salary amounts. In addition, these personnel expenditures include the 5-hold teachers that Dr. Trainee discussed, and also a reduction of 47.26 FTE, moving those positions from the general fund to the ESSER 2 funds that we are expecting for next year. For the other part of those personnel expenditures are focused on the benefits associated with employment. We assume a health insurance increase at an annual rate of 8%. That's information that we've received from our health consultants as an estimate for next year. 8% is also the average that we've had over the last 5 years. So we look both at what's reasonable for the industry and also what we've experienced recently. We assume that all other benefits don't have any changes other than those that would be associated with salary increases. And this year have reserved a 5% for total compensation, which is, as you saw earlier, less than what we have reserved previously. And all of the information we're presenting tonight excludes the on behalf of payments, which is the accounting entry from the state of Alaska. In non-personnel expenditures, we have just as much diligence in going through to estimate accurate numbers for these areas. School site non-personnel budgets, we maintain the same numbers that we had previously, and I'll review those when we talk about the metrics. The department non-personnel budgets are maintained with zero increase, which means they're not adjusted based on enrollment in the same way that school budgets are. In looking at utilities, we take a 3-year average on usage and then the current rates that we know of. For this year, it is a little bit different just because of the anomaly of last school year. We're using 2017 through 2019 to develop those averages with all of our facilities essentially closed for a portion of last year. We didn't want that history to sway what those averages would be. We are expecting a 15% increase in property and liability insurance. That's our best guess of what we can expect based on what brokers have shared with us. And then the final assumption on those non-personnel expenditures is the $2.2 million transfer for student transportation, and then a smaller transfer for debt service fund for Frontera Spanish Immersion Charter School. So a lot of language there. I appreciate your patience as I reviewed all of that. Our expenditure assumptions center around ratios and metrics for the most part. We use these because it helps us ensure equity amongst all of our locations. And we use them both for personnel allocations of teachers as well as school site non-personnel spending. And so what you can see here is just the summary of those PTR and per pupil funding areas. These are not going to be changing from this year to next year. Is part of the budget survey, which was completed through the month of February. We had 533 respondents roundabout, and what we heard this year is what we've heard in many years in the past. Class size is very important to families and stakeholders, and part of the reason why we're proposing that we maintain the current ratios that are established. What's also here is a summary of total FTE, a comparison of the initial FY22 allocations and the adjustments that are made in the adopted preliminary, with a total FTE of just under 19,000 staff positions. You can see the major adjustment is really to classroom teachers. And again, that's not a reduction in positions necessarily. That's the transfer of those positions from the general operating fund to the ESSER2 funds. And the final way that we really like to break down the our expenditures is a look at the 70-30 calculation, which is no longer a requirement in the state of Alaska, but we still continue to use as a good benchmark and measure. And you can see that while the old rule established 70% as the minimum for what districts had to expend on instruction, we continue to hold at 78% with 21% on instructional support. What we also realize in looking at these figures and the definitions that the state has provided for us in the chart of accounts is it's not necessarily a full picture of all funds that are expended in schools. And so one of the other calculations that we run in evaluating the expenditures and where dollars are going is really to look at those other expenditure items that while the state does not determine as instruction, we know go to support schools and school buildings. So the original line really stops at school administration, and that is just the principal's office. So the other classified staff that support schools in the front office are included in school admin support. All of the funds that are expended to maintain the buildings, fix the buildings, clean the buildings, including custodial support, that's listed under operations and maintenance. And then student activities is also listed here at 1.3%. Really, from one perspective, you could see that all of those expenditures are really supporting the school environment, the school culture, and the academic program. And if we take all of those together, it provides for that instruction and instructional support at 94% of total expenditures. So our next transition, I'll hand it back over to Dr. Trainey, will be on the long-term planning, but I can certainly pause if there are questions on expenditures.
Okay, I'll go on with long-term funding. So this is a historical look visually at our ending fund balance over the last 10 years. And you can
finish your presentation. Mr. McKee did have a question.
Oh, okay.
Let's go ahead and finish your presentation.
Okay, there aren't very many slides left.
Yeah.
You can see that FY 2020, 23.625 million, but we do have it broken out by district, unassigned fund balance, and charter. So the charter school's real roughly about 3.6 million of that, which leaves the district with about a $20 million unassigned ending fund balance. We tried to do a compare and contrast between the borough and the district on this slide. You can see that 23.625 again, and 40.33 million for the borough. And the borough does have 25 million committed. As I understand it, that is, so I should have the expert in the back of the room talk about this one. At any rate, you have 25 million committed. So you can go out for future bonding, and for catastrophic uses. As a percentage of our budget, we are capped at 10%. So we try to hit the 10% mark or be under it. And then, as I understand it, this is 42% of your general fund expenditures. Next slide, we try to do three forecasts looking into the future. The first one is pessimistic, the next one is moderate, and the third one is, man, things have worked out perfectly. What we're trying to show here in the red line is expenditures, and the blue line revenue. So in a pessimistic forecast, if we assume our enrollment only increases by 1.37% a year, that the borough continues to support 6.3 mills, but the tax base only increases by 2%. The state BSA stays flat. There's no additional one-time funds, which Member Sumner, this speaks to what I was talking about earlier. Nobody knows. That you can see that delta by 2026 grows quite a lot. Like we would be in a deficit problem year after year and growing. The next one is a more moderate forecast. Same initial assumption for enrollment, same assumption for the mill rate, but a tax base increase of 2.5%. It would also assume that the BSA goes up by about $116, no one-time funds. And you can see that the delta gets smaller over time. And then the third forecast, and we were trying to do one that would get us close to even. So 1.3% enrollment increase a year over year, 6.3 stays the same. Tax base increases by 4% a year. The BSA goes up by $100 year over year, so every year. That's what it would take in this forecast for us to be close to even by 2026, FY 2026. That's all we have on this part, Mayor, so we could take some more questions.
Okay, now we'll open up to questions. Mr. McKee?
Yes, the first charts that we saw said that you had 1,100 students less this year than you did. How many teachers did you lay off?
Yeah, we didn't lay off any teachers in the whole. I'm not talking about individual teachers, but in the whole, the total staff stayed about the same from last year to this year. A major driver of that was the federal dollars that you brought up earlier. That maintained positions going from last budget to this budget.
But my question then is, why would you keep the same number of teachers if you had 10% less students? That doesn't make sense. If you were a private sector firm, you go broke.
Yeah, but we, like, I don't mean to sound flippant this way, but we are in the position of trying to be ready for the students next year. And if we start removing programs, like if you say, take apart the music program as Colony, you can't take it away and then build it back the next year. It just doesn't work that way. If we thought this was a legitimate downturn, like that our actual enrollment was going to keep heading down, then we'd have taken different action. But we're presuming, and we have pretty good evidence that this is the case, that it's not going to continue down, that it is in fact going to continue up, because since the October count, we've added back about 500 students. So we have pretty good reason to believe that they are going to return. And then we're guessing, like I said, it's a guess, the percentage that comes back next year. We don't have any good number.
My understanding is the 500 students you are referring to that increased actually came from the Anchorage School District because they were closed.
Yeah, I do know that, we hear those anecdotal stories of students coming to us from Anchorage because they were closed. We also know that there's a lot of growth in the valley. We have some home builders here who can attest to homes being built. But the majority of the students that we've had return since the start of the year have been our own students. They were people who were uncomfortable at the beginning of the year with the situation, and then as it rolled out, they became more comfortable. Ms. Gardner just shared with me one other thing. Another reason we were unable to lay off, as we had already got past the point in the year where we had that as an ability. The contracts were already issued. We had signed on the dotted line. We couldn't lay those people off.
Ms. Welton?
There were some people who were let go. It wasn't like everybody who was just hired could stay on, correct?
Yeah, and that's why I don't think I did a good job. Like, individuals were laid off. The aggregate number was very similar from one year to the next.
Hey, more questions? Ms. Nowers? School board
Oh,
members can
I do
jump in
have, I have a napkin answer to your previous question. But go ahead, ask this one.
Okay, all right.
Let's do the napkin answer real quick. 'Cause this
Yeah,
kinda
go ahead.
excites
What's
me.
the napkin answer? How many napkins?
Yeah. Katie just showed me something, but I think I have, so I try to do, worst case, best case. Let's say none of those kids came back, like none of them. We stayed exactly where we are right now. So that would be worst case. In straight dollars, BSA only, that would be about $7.2 million reduction. But it's not the BSA only because, as you know, there's additional weights added on. So as a crude back of the napkin, some of the weights have to do with, like, do you have a small school like Glacier View? We get additional weights for that. So I chose a number of about 38%. So instead of a student counting as one, they count as 1.38, which is going to be roughly in the ballpark. That means if none of them came, it would be a $9.6 million loss, but it would be cut in half. So $4.5 million would be the worst case scenario. I guess it could be even worse than that. Even more people could leave. I only went down to if we stayed right where we were.
So that 0.5 that you're assuming, that's
Yeah.
not the worst case scenario.
No, I mean, worst case scenario is 10,000 people could leave, right? But it's not a realistic scenario. We do think we're
I'm
going to
sorry,
be.
I'm just trying to get to the, 4.5 was kind of
Yeah,
your.
4.5, I think, would be the very worst case if nobody came back.
Okay. My other question is, it does look like you're going to get some additional funding in the Round 3 CARES Fund. The figure I've heard is in the 30s range.
Yep.
So have you discussed, and I'm super happy that the 15 million is being able to be spread out over a couple of years, that you'll be able to, support those positions. It looks like into the 2023. With that 38 million, what sort of discussion ideas you have where you would put, or however much it becomes, do you have some ideas of where you would put that when it becomes available?
Yep. The first number that I had heard came up to that 38 million-ish, just napkin math again. The most recent number that I heard yesterday was they wanted us to think about twice what we just got. So that would be more like 32 million. So 30 millions in that, somewhere in there. We also heard that, and this is all very preliminary, that we'd be able to spend it through 2024, and that we could expect between 60 and 90 days from now to find out what the actual allocation is and what the rules are. So we don't know all the rules or what the actual money is. So in huge generalities, what types of things could we spend it on? I've been trying to think of things that we could spend it on that would fund forward, or reduce current expenditures now. So we could spread that money out over a longer period of time rather than, just wasting it quickly. As there's no plans here. This isn't a plan. This is me brainstorming out loud in front of far too many people. let's say the district had a recurring obligation, they were renting a building somewhere. It might be a good opportunity to get out of that, right? If we're spending $1 million a year on rent, you might have an opportunity to take advantage of that. Let's say the district had an impending healthcare problem, which we do, and you were looking at self-insuring to reduce that ongoing liability. The problem is you need money up front to cover the costs. It could be used for that. So generally brainstorming ideas that will pay dividends over a longer period of time rather than spending the money very quickly up front.
Okay.
Those were brainstorms, not plans. The board hasn't even heard them.
Mr. Sumner?
Yeah, through the mayor. So I'm a little confused. So for fiscal year 21, how much less revenue than you budgeted do you believe you will be receiving through the end of fiscal year 21?
You mean this year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fiscal year, right?
Boy, I wish Luke was here, so I'm going to tell you what's the numbers stuck in my head. I believe that our revenue this year came in slightly above what was budgeted because of one-time dollars. Not what's that? And yeah, and the hold harmless. That was a significant portion. Had the hold harmless not come into play this year, it would have been a large reduction. And like how, I don't know, a couple, 3-4 million like that, much more.
Right, but the hold harmless, I mean, that's in state statute, so we knew that would, well, I mean, I don't know that necessarily we knew it would apply because there's not been a situation like this, but were your expenditures then higher than budgeted for fiscal year 21? Well, I mean, perhaps you don't know yet, but I mean, were there very large expenditures that would bring you above the budgeted amount?
Yeah. So in huge generalities, I know that the budget that would have been passed and presented to this body last year would have been balanced. I believe that included the use of some fund balance. So it was already a deficit spending balance to use fund balance. After that, we negotiated with our largest union, the teachers, which added additional. So there's an additional reduction. No, I don't have numbers stuck in my head, Member Sumner, but in general, that's what happened.
Just to add to that, the reduction went back a year on the teachers' negotiation. It went back a retro year. So we had to use that fund balance for that, as well as fund balance for the increase in payroll for 2021. We did save a little bit of money when we shut down last spring for 2 months, but it wasn't that substantial because we actually weren't in school from March to the end of the year. Nobody was in school at the time, and we did online learning. That's why we decided, the key figure we wanted school to start. And so school started with the same budget, and that budget has been maintained in a deficit mode, although we use fund balance to do that. And like we've stated, for the next 2 or 3 years, we will use our fund balance because we will be in that deficit mode on a continuous basis. And also, just to throw one more thing out, let me see if I've got it in my notes. The fund balance, the deficit mode was also due to, I can't find my notes. I'll come back to it, sorry.
Mr. McKee.
Yeah, I keep hearing deficit. The audited fund balance for the school district on the 31st of December 2020 was $23,400,000. What's your fund balance today?
Yeah, it's about 23 million, whatever we put up there early, 600,000, something like that.
Okay, so if you've got that fund balance, why are you keep referring to a deficit? You are not a for-profit entity. You folks are a subdivision of the borough. You are a government agency.
This is Member Hart. Can I break in just for a second?
Go ahead, sir.
I just want to make a point because there are going to be some people listening that aren't necessarily on any of the boards or associated in any way. A fund balance is a savings. One-time money is kind of like Aunt Mabel dies and leaves you 15 grand. You do not budget based on what Aunt Mabel might leave you when she dies. You can't. We're looking forward and we're balancing based on income we have. Now, we will use the fund balance, the savings, as appropriate. But the fact is, our income, our regular income, sort of like your job, is X number of dollars. Aunt Mabel, Uncle Ted, everybody else leaving us money, those are one-time monies that you cannot count on again. We need to budget into the future with the knowns, not the unknowns. Now, God has blessed us with some wonderful blessings, and we're thankful for that. But the thing is, we still need to address the long-term budget, which will not remain like this. That's the thing. It's almost a curse that we've been blessed with this extra money. But please understand, again, and characterize it correctly, one-time money is not recurring money. I just wanted to set the tone of the conversation from this point.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hart. And just to jump in there, I found my notes. A good example of why we keep going in deficits, not only because of contracts, but for instance, our insurance for earthquake insurance, since we had a catastrophic earthquake, went up by $750,000 a year. So that's an increase that we never had in the past, as well as various other increases that go up. So we are constant, because our BSA does not increase, we are constantly in a deficit mode. We constantly go down. What saved us over the last 10 years is we did increase in population. 1 or 2 years in a row, we can increase by up to 400 kids, which is enough to fill an elementary, which kept us out of the red, but we still had to cut because we could never add that many teachers because we were constantly in a deficit mode. The BSA is the big issue here. It stays flat. We go into a deficit.
Okay.
But the state doesn't have any money, and has been broken. It's had some issues. So we have been taking that deficit, and we can only manage the money that we get. We're not going to complain.
Okay. Mr. McKee, then we're going to do 1 or 2 more questions from Ms. Nowers and Mr. Sumner. Then I think we should go to our second agenda item because I think there's a lot of people here to hear about Houston.
Look,
Mr. McKee?
I'd like to know where the fund balance comes from. My understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, is that the fund balance, which by the way has grown terrifically over the last 5 years that I've been on the borough, okay? My understanding, that comes from excess above your budget amount. That is money you don't spend. It goes into fund balance. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so you don't do it in bake sales, okay? You do it with the taxpayers' money that comes either from the state or from the borough, correct? In excess to what you have asked for in the budget.
Yeah, or federal dollars, which is what we're really looking at right now. It's been one of the prime drivers.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Trainee, can I ask another question?
Go ahead, please.
Okay, when it comes to one-time monies like grants, are those in any way guaranteed that you're going to receive them when you apply for them?
No.
When it comes to earthquake money or insurance money, is there any way that you can look in your crystal ball and determine that you're going to receive one-time money from insurance?
Nope. Or FEMA for that matter.
Is there any way that you can look into your crystal ball and budget knowing full well that you're going to get COVID money because some pandemic nobody's heard of is going to magically appear on our shores?
No.
Thank you very much. I just thought I wanted to clarify. Wanted to clarify the characteristics of some of this money.
Yeah, Mr. Hart, I'll go ahead and round
I
this
think
up.
it's-
All that is one-time money, either from federal or from when we actually did take a hold, when the state said they were going to cut our budget. We had a hiring freeze and we didn't hire it that spring, which is when it was actually some operational money. But the majority over the last 5 years is all money that we did not budget at all. That was either pandemic money, one-time money, IRA money, and now we're going to get another big chunk of money. So this is not money that is in our budget from year to year. You're correct. And it goes into the deficit. Goes into the fund balance. The problem is, the biggest problem I see is we went from 5 years ago to a $2 or $3 million fund balance to a $20 million fund balance because we did not just spend that money on frivolous things or just blow it. It seems everybody looks at that. What we want to do with that money, or what we want to do with it, is pay down our deficit and pay for programs that bring up long-term scores and increased graduation and CTE and possibly preschool, which preschool has stated that will help our kindergartners and all the way through third grade as our kindergarten kids come in 22% ready for schools. And so we're looking at trying to figure out how to bring up scores, how to educate our kids in a long-term basis. But constantly we're being pointed at that we are shoving money from operations into that reserve, and that's majority is all one-time money.
Okay. Mr. Hart, was that you that spoke just before President Larson? We just need to get that for the record for the clerk, please.
Yes.
Okay. Mr.
Yes,
Hart was speaking.
that was Jim Hart.
Okay. Ms. Nauer?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say for the record, I understand a structural deficit. I don't have an Aunt Mabel, but I have an Aunt Ina. I'm not counting on anything, but maybe a nice plate. Come 30, some that may come through. I'm looking at your forecast, your medium forecast. That buys you some breathing room in terms of if you get 30 million and if you're able to use it in ways that, help spread it out over the years. So does the fund balance. I think the borough kind of looks at things the same way. You want some breathing room there. Am I right in saying that if you do have additional funds come through, that looking at these projections, that would help in terms of being able to close those gaps and give us time to work on some of these things like healthcare, like energy costs that are drivers for you, and see if we can find ways to get those down and then use the funds to help the kids, which is what we want to do.
Yep. It certainly would help that delta as long as nothing else changed. And I don't want to throw the big wet blanket on there, but it's great that, we may get this windfall. The legislature could also decide to decrease the BSA, which I've heard as a possibility that states are considering that, because as we understand it, these dollars won't come with that rate, with those supplement versus supplant rules that normally go with federal funds. So it would be within the legislature's ability to say, oh, you just got $30 million, Matsu, and commensurate everywhere across the state. We're going to lower the BSA by a similar amount over that same time period. So we could, the best case scenario, we're going to have 30 million-ish something, 32, 33, 34, or maybe less than that, depending on what happens at the state level. And you could imagine why the pressure would be that way on our state delegation, right? Like, they're in deficit spending. So why spend money that they don't have to?
Okay, Mr. Sumner, then Mr. Yount, and then we're going to move out of this agenda item.
Let's just move on. Mr. Young.
Mr. Yount?
Thank you to you 5 sophomores for showing up. So you guys are doing a lot of what I'm doing, which is sitting here observing, right? So I got a question for you guys. Do you feel like you're listening to a big game of cat and mouse? Okay, that's what's happening. All right. So I assure you that everybody on the assembly, the school board, your guys' superintendent, and our mayor are really damn good people. We were waiting to find out how much money we were gonna get from FEMA. We got insurance stuff we gotta figure out, but I guarantee you we're gonna build that school. And I hope they just lock us in a room and we can figure this out, right? But I assure you it's gonna happen soon, so.
I'll allow that. Okay, so we'll wrap up that first agenda item. I will say on the school funding that, the Mat-Su Borough is obligated to 6.3 mils for operating money. I don't think there's any dispute among assembly members, so it's not my decision, but that's our intention. I think the manager has budgeted that, the chief financial officer has budgeted that. I see it was in your presentation, and that's about $3 million more than it was last year in operating money going to the school district. So on that operations, and I will say that ordinance was written 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know the exact date, but it was written before this whole issue about school bond debt. School bond debt has seemed like it's throwing a little wrench into the system. So that's what has been causing a little bit of fray, I guess. But let's turn to Houston Middle School. Now, before we start, I want to keep Ms. Heindel, don't go too far. Mr. Manager, could you kind of swing over here too and get closer? But my first question, I don't know who could answer this, maybe Mr. Spropoulos or somebody. Somebody in the audience asked about, can we start building Houston Middle School without the total amount of money already accumulated? So who wants to, Ms. Heindel, you gonna take that one on, or Mr. Spropoulos, who wants to answer that? Can we build a school without all the money there? Somebody asked that in the audience participation.
Cheyenne Heindel, Finance Director, to the Mayor and the Assembly. At this point, I have $28.1 million that I can fund verify. It's my understanding the school is going to cost more than that. So at this point, no, we cannot fund verify that because we do not have the money in hand to build this school.
Okay. So, Mr. Dolan, I guess maybe you could come forward and tell us how much the estimated school building cost is, or how much we're short, I guess is the question.
Dolan, Director of,
Terry, can you turn on that mic? Thank you.
Terry Dolan, Director of Public Works. So the cost estimate to build the school is about $34 million. And that doesn't include a number of items. There was a request for culinary equipment and small engine repair shop equipment and that type of thing. None of those items are included in that estimate. But 34 gets you the whole school, the gym, the academic wing, all of that.
Okay. 34 million.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please.
That 34 million is just to build the school, correct? It's not to refurbish the school. How much will it cost to refurbish the school after it's built?
So you're talking about furnishings?
Correct.
I don't believe the 34 million includes that.
But that's an additional cost, correct?
It is. We did not preserve furnishings from the old school.
Does the school district, I believe, have that amount? What would it cost to refurbish the school?
Yeah, we have an estimate that later on based on, the state has a formula. We use that formula, and then staff said that typically for that size building, the formula is actually a little high. It came at 1.7 million. And so we've been saying $1.5 million.
But then they're talking about other equipment, culinary equipment and other equipment, which would bring that up to about 1.7.
Couldn't, sure.
So we're talking about a school of 35 million plus 1.7 million, which is 26.7 million. That money has to be found somewhere. The 35 million to kick it off and to build it, but then the 1.7 million to pour into refurbishing the school. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Dolan. Let's.
I have a question through the mayor to Mr. Dolan.
Okay.
Can you build a school for $21 million? Not the dream, not the Taj Mahal, a functional school for $21 million.
So that's a very difficult question to answer. For this, the size of school that you need for the population that you have, I don't believe that for that price you could reasonably build it unless you significantly reduced your expectation in terms of the quality of the facilities. I could for sure get you some temporary mobile buildings for that.
Have you looked at anything less than $34 million?
So what we looked at was a school in a similar size and capacity to what was lost, using standards that were provided to us by the school district and by their advisory boards. So I did not do an engineering analysis of a smaller school or a school with other standards.
Well, we're gonna move on here. I'll just say at the last joint assembly school board meeting, we had the architect's drawings that were presented to us on the exact school that we're trying to build for Houston. And I think that's a pretty tough question for Mr. Dolan just to handle off the cuff. We're trying to reach to 34 million. We've got 28 million. And that's what I wanted the people here from Houston to realize is that we're short 6 million. So that's the issue is getting this $6 million. And I agree with Senator Yount. I want you young people right out here to be the first graduating class that comes from that new school building. And so that's the issue today is trying to figure out how we come up with that 6 million just to get this contract out and construction started this summer. So thank you, Mr. Dolan. Mr. Trainee, I'll kind of turn it over to you now. And I'm sorry I jumped in ahead of the school.
It's your meeting, Mr. Mayor. So this is the same report that I gave at the board Wednesday. So if you watched it, it should be the same, although we do have more information that I've learned some today. So this first slide is just kind of a recap of where we are, which I know that all of the assembly members and the board members know, but there may be people in the audience. Mr. Mayor, we received a letter from you on March 3rd, and basically it said these 4 bullet points that the borough is prepared to cover school bond debt reimbursement, which we all understand was not anybody's fault in this room. It just happened at the state level with the governor and our legislators. It was mentioned that we have 15.8 million in ESSER money, and I've tried to do my best to show that those ESSER dollars are committed to staff, and it's that 47 FTE that I mentioned earlier for this year, or for this coming year and the year afterwards. The district does have an ending fund balance, which we've talked a lot about tonight. And then there was a formal request for the district to fill the gap from the mayor. Then we received another letter which had some good news that the last insurance settlement came in at an additional 4.6 million, which leaves roughly $6 million unfunded. The bid documents, as I understand it, are ready now because we're past the 19th. And then the concern of everybody in the room right now, I believe, is that a delay could delay the school for up to 6 months or even a year. We tried to do this slide to visually demonstrate that the district is committed and has skin in the game. And so in general, the blue tones are dollars towards the 34 million that we believe the district has committed. And the red tones are the part that we believe the borough has committed. And then there's the gray part, which is that roughly $6 million unfunded. So the district's contributions primarily are from insurance settlements. And we prorated that because the district doesn't pay all of those insurance premiums. The borough pays some. So we have yours highlighted in one of those red hues. So insurance proceeds that we've got from premiums that we've paid. And I think President Larson mentioned like our premiums have gone up $500,000 on the seismic insurance that we have alone, and that's going up year over year. So that's an ongoing cost that we have. At any rate, we're left, at this point, we thought it was 6.5 million. Maybe it's closer to 6 million or even more than that if you count the furnishings like Member Larson mentioned. Our concern is this Alaska Statute 1414/060. When you read the statute book, you know it's all over. I'm no lawyer, but the language seems plain to me. And then talking with members of the Borough Assembly and staff of the Borough Assembly, I don't think there's much disagreement on this. The Borough School Board, so the school board shall provide for custodial services, routine maintenance for school buildings, and shall appoint, compensate, and otherwise control personnel for those. And then it goes on in the next sentence, same statute. The Borough Assembly through the administrator shall provide for all major rehabilitation, all construction, and major repair of school buildings. Later on the Alaska Administrative Codes 3190, it talks about capital equipment being part of construction rehabilitation. So at any rate, I don't think there's any question like where the responsibility is. It's the timing of it, I think, is why we're here. Like I've heard assembly members, I've heard the mayor, like this will happen. The borough will take care of it. They just can't take care of it right now. I think that's kind of the situation we're in. So only one slide left, and this is the Randy Trainee slide. And this is why all of you elected officials get paid the big bucks right now. I've been trying to think about what the middle of the road solution is, or what any solutions are. We had heard last week from FEMA in an email, this project is a top priority for the reviewer and the validation is scheduled to be completed no later than 3/19, as long as there's no additional information. But as I understand it, we still haven't heard from FEMA and that they'll probably need additional information. So when and if FEMA comes through is a big question mark. So I tried to come up with 3 solutions that could do this. In the GO bonds at the state legislature, there is still $9 million earmarked for the Houston project. That may or may not be passed. If I was betting, I would think it's probably not going to be passed, but it is a possibility. The borough could fund the project next year, but everybody recognizes that we need to get this done or next year or in years forward, but everybody recognizes in the room for all the reasons that the students and other people from Houston have mentioned that we need to get this done now. It's embarrassing that it could take more than 5 years to get a school built. The district could forward fund, but back to that problem slide, we don't think it's our obligation to pay for reconstruction of buildings. We think that the Alaska statute's pretty clear, and that is the borough's responsibility. So could we here's my brainstorm, and my brainstorm only, the board hasn't voted on this. Is there a way for us to forward fund it with the understanding that it's a loan and it could be paid back any of 3 ways? One way, and the way that I think we all hope, is that FEMA actually comes through and then those dollars were paid back. If that didn't happen, or if FEMA didn't come back with enough money to pay back the district, then we'd need for one of the other 2 to come through. The state GO bonds, where they have $9 million, that's another potential. Or could it be that the borough says, you know what, if all things fail, if FEMA doesn't come through with either any or enough money, or the state doesn't come through with any money, we will pay you back over some time period. It could be a lengthy time period even. And once again, these are just one person's ideas. If it was a $6 million over 10 years, and maybe the payback period doesn't even start for 5 years because we know FEMA could take that long. So it's a way to share the risk between the district and the borough. There may be other ways. With that, I will take any questions or let you all debate amongst yourselves.
Mr. Yount.
I could be wrong. I'm the new kid on the block, but we can't speak for future assemblies, correct, when it comes to repayment plans and whatnot? Nick's not here.
Mr. Spropoulos, we got to come forward. I said you guys should get up here beginning.
I'm hiding. It's the only meeting I get to sit in the back. Sorry, Assemblymember Young, what's the question here?
I appreciate the brainstorming. I really do. I want to make sure I can make a commitment, right? I could sit here and tell you if we work out a deal that I'm good for it. But in the future, if we kick the can down the road too far, FEMA does or doesn't come through, it doesn't matter. Anybody here cannot marry a future assembly to our votes, correct?
Well, any future payments by any future senator is always subject to appropriation.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
I'll stay close.
Stay right up there. Okay, more questions? Houston Middle School. Mr. Hale, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say that I support this final bullet point here where the district forward funds and then, you get reimbursed. However it has to happen, I would support that 100%. So, I think that's a good option that gets the money into the account it needs to be so that we can build the school and get it up and running and get these kids back to school. And then, if FEMA comes through, they come through. If they don't, we figure out some other way to make good on it. But I think that's an excellent idea.
Mr. Probasco?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. What's the expected reimbursement or from FEMA? We don't know.
Mr. Dolan has spoken to him.
Terry Dolan, Director of Public Works. So the answer is that we don't know. You can expect FEMA to come up with a total value of the project, whatever they decide that is, and then they'll deduct from that the insurance payments that we received, and they'll cover the remaining amount.
And so the insurance proceeds, the first one was 15 million, and then this most recent 4.6. Mr. Larson?
Yeah, I think there's other brainstorming ideas too. We've already thrown 5.9 million into the pot, and we're now being asked to throw another 6 million into the pot. And then I guess we're going to have to pay the 1.7 million to refurbish it. So, we're talking up to $12 million from the district. The question would be is, looking at the slides, you do have some money in the pot. How about, you guys putting some skin into the game? Splitting the 6 million or paying for the 1.7 million. I mean, why all of a sudden does a school district have to come up with $13 million and the borough have no skin in the game? So the idea is, how come you guys don't jump up and help out a little bit? Nobody is at fault here. Nobody's at fault on this earthquake. And nobody's at fault on the way this building was built, even though it was not built correctly. It was built to code in '86, but it was built wrong. Nobody's at fault. So where's the borough as far as skin in the game?
Well, that's a pretty broad question, I guess. I've thought, and Mr. Manager could come forward too, the Matsu Borough has negotiated insurance settlements, 15 million, the 4.6 million. We've been very active. I guess a counter offer to Mr. Trainee is, our operating funds at 6.3 mils with the escalated higher appraised values in the Matsu, which is 5 or 6%. Don't quote me totally on that, but they're quite high this year. So that's about 65,841,000. If we cut that operating money and put it over to building this high school, I think that would work for the Matsu Borough too. But that would, I know how the school district always wants that 6.3 million operating money. So, but Mr. Brown, can you enlighten us on what Mr. Larson is talking about?
Through the mayor to Mr. Larson, or really to the group, I think it's a great thing to get on record because I would argue the borough has skin in the game already. And here's the challenge. With the state's unpredictability around school bond debt reimbursement, the borough's facing the state's portion somewhere between $0 and $17 million annually over the next few years. That'll taper off over time. And I've had the opportunity to explain this to a couple of members. The challenge is this: the borough is looking at how to mitigate that issue for the next 15 to 20 years. And how do we solve that problem? So the challenge is, we don't know if the state's going to fund their full share of that school bond debt reimbursement, which would equal $17 million for the next fiscal year, or if they're going to fund half of that obligation, which is $8.5 million for this next fiscal year. So the borough's already taken that on. So in addition to the 1 mil, the borough's portion of school bond debt reimbursement, the borough's now taking on, or at least planning to take on in our preliminary budget, half of the state's, and I'll call it obligation, but I recognize that it's subject to appropriation. But we've taken that on and budgeted for that. So when we look at our fund balance numbers and those past commitments, debt that already has been sold and exists that must be paid back, that's the challenge for why the borough would be reluctant to throw more in at this point in time. The 1 mil that's already set aside for school bond debt reimbursement goes to schools. The half of the state's obligation that the borough set aside goes to schools. That's in addition to the 6.3 that the borough is contributing for operating expenses. So it's not that, I just want to be clear, it's not that we don't care or that we don't want to do this. The challenge is we still have the school bond debt reimbursement on the table, and that problem has to be solved. We know it's going to exist in FY22, 23, all the way out to like 2035. So as I've explained it, and this is the rationale, when we look at the levers that the assembly has to raise new revenues, taxes, whether it's excise taxes or sales taxes, it takes generally about 1.5 years to raise the revenues to make a debt service payment. So what we're looking at now, we're looking at how do we budget for FY22, which comes due July 1st, right? We're also looking at how do we address the issue in FY23, which comes due in July 1st of 2022. Because the assembly would have had to have taken action, or we would have to take action 2 months ago to raise revenues to pay for not this coming fiscal year, but for the following fiscal year. So what we're trying to do is lead by 1 year on school bond debt reimbursement. So if the state does not come through with an appropriation to honor its 70% reimbursement to the borough, the assembly has the lever potentially to raise new revenues to address the problem on a recurring basis.
I just want to add that $200 million bond was suggested by the school district and voted on by the school district and sent up to the borough, and the borough approved it to go to the voters, and the voters voted on it. So that whole bond was a 70-30 split, and the 70-30 split had a history of 30 years, or more. So anybody would have gone at that. Nobody predicted what occurred with the state revenue and the fact that they cut it down. So everybody has a skin in the game on that bond issue, and it's not a school district fault that bond went through. It was necessary to build new schools. Now, so it's not like this is a school district bond. It's the borough's bond. It's the whole district bond. It's for all our kids, to educate our kids. And the voters voted on that bond to pass that bond. So the voters also have a skin in the game on that bond also. And I agree with you, and I appreciate the borough looking at paying for that bond, because somebody has to. But we're talking about operations money that has been given to the school district, either in one-time money or through this BSA or through the borough. One-time money that the statutes say we cannot give out for construction. And we already have 5.9 million we did under the last superintendent and the last school board member. We gave out 5.9 million. We took a look at the statutes. The statute says we can't. So the question is, how do we get around not violating the Alaska statutes by slipping out This is stuff we got to think about. We don't have to resolve this here. In Houston, we're going to probably resolve this. We're just discussing these issues. It's not that we're going to not build this school, because we're in the business of educating kids, and we want our kids in school, not one crammed with two schools in one. I agree, that's too much. So these are just some of my thoughts. So you and your legal team and everybody else has got to figure out if we're obligated, if there's no choice, but you're gonna get the money out of our reserve, which is all one-time money that we have obligated for different programs in the future, how we're gonna do that and not violate the letter of the law. It's pretty simple. I'm not willing to violate the Alaska statutes, but there's ways around it, I'm sure.
Mr. Spropoulos?
Through the mayor, can I address a couple of those real quick? Mr. Larson, I completely agree with you regarding the past obligation. The state gave every reason for the voters, the assembly, and the school board to believe that if they voted a $214 million bond up, that the state would honor its obligations. What I would say is the borough's in a similar situation to the school district. When you talk about one-time monies, and I can't remember what the aunt's name was or the uncle's name was that was the one-time money, we're essentially in the same boat with the state of Alaska with regard to its portion of school bond debt reimbursement. We don't know year to year if they're going to come through, and if they come through, what they're going to come through with. It essentially becomes one-time money. It's not predictable into the future. So essentially, we're in the same boat you're in with regards to your one-time monies in terms of how do we predict and plan for the future. What I know is that we have to give the assembly time, if they desire to raise new revenues, to cover up already existing obligation, right? Debt that's on the books that exists today that has to be paid according to a debt service schedule. That's what I'm trying to communicate. There's no lack of desire to build the school. And I agree with you completely. This school is going to get built. What we're talking about here tonight is on what timeline. And I think it's clear, you don't want to tie your timeline to the federal government. And I say that because that's been our experience with FEMA. As far as the legalities and who shall do what, I'm not going to speak for the attorney. I don't know if he wants to come up here and take that one. I'm not a lawyer. That's why we have one. So if he wants to clarify, I'm happy to defer to him.
I would prefer not debating the attorney issue.
No, I want the question answered about this. You brought it up about whether using operating money or construction money or.
Well, I know what
Mr. Larson, this is our borough
I know
attorney.
that, but I know what the statutes say.
Well,
you can debate it all day long.
Mr.
And
Spropoulos, you could.
A gigantic part of the statute out that says those duties can be changed.
Well, we listened to our attorney and our attorney said something different. So maybe you and our attorney should get together and then you could bring it forward and we don't need to debate this.
I want to show everyone the statute.
Okay, that's
So if you can pull up, go to Alaska. Okay, so go to Title 14. Title 14, Chapter 14, Section. So then click on the Operation of District Article 1, and then go to 060. And just scroll down. Keep going a little bit more, a little bit more. Okay, so there's the sections at issue, right? The borough, what we have here is the E and F. The school board's responsible for design criteria buildings. I'm sorry, F. The school board shall provide for custodial services, routine maintenance in school buildings, and shall appoint, compensate, and otherwise control personnel for these purposes, right? E, subject to the school, E is the part that talks about the borough assembly constructing and doing the schools. Look at I. Notwithstanding E and F, a borough assembly and a borough school board may divide the duties imposed under E and F by agreement.
Okay, thank you.
It's not a prohibition. It can change.
So when was the agreement reached? This is Member Hart.
Pardon, go ahead, Mr. Hart. Say that again, please.
When was the agreement reached that the school board would take this up?
I don't understand the question myself. Mr. Spropoulos was referring
I'm sorry.
to.
I'm sorry, it was mentioned that under statute that the responsibilities could be reallocated by agreement. I was wondering when that agreement was reached.
Well, there's been
That
no
the school
agreement.
board would,
Yeah, there was no agreement.
Okay,
That's
thank
just
you for that
some section
clarification.
that could happen, was what the borough attorney was saying.
Right. The question is it an illegal act to do it? And the answer is clearly no, because the statute says so.
Okay, we've got.
until there's an agreement reached, I would say it is.
Are you, go ahead, Mr. Hart.
Sorry, I was saying until there's an agreement reached, I would say it would be a breach, wouldn't it? Just making a point, there is no agreement yet, and that Mr. Larson is right in principle.
Right, but the context of the conversation was it can't be done.
Okay.
The answer is it can if you want to.
Okay, let's move on. Mr. Yant, then Ms. Bovee, then Mr. Sumner, then Ms. Nowers.
One quick question for Mr. Dolan. We got a number that we keep talking about on this shortfall right now, but I got a quick question about the architect's estimate. How old is it? When was the estimate?
From the middle of February, we created that estimate based on 50% design plans.
So it was as recent as a few months ago?
It was, but it was conducted in a time period before we were seeing a rapid increase in the cost of construction materials. So there's certainly a possibility that when we go out to bid for this project, the bid price could be higher than what we were estimating.
And I'm not trying to ruin anyone's day, but I just wanted to point out, and I know you're aware, of course, but lumber, in the last 12 months, lumber's up 300%. Steel's up double, okay? So when in inflation, we're in the low twos on inflation. We've had a good run on inflation for you guys, economically speaking, in America. We've done awesome with inflation lately. By the end of this year, we're looking at hitting 3%. Inflation's on the rise. So all this helicopter money, this one-time money from Aunt whoever you want to name her, we might want to look at spending it before we get smoked by inflation even more. So I just wanted to point that out. Jessie and I see it every day. Materials are through the roof. We probably don't want to kick this can down the road any longer. So, thank you, sir.
Ms. Bovee?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This question is either for Manager Brown or Director Heindel. In your explanation of the school bond debt and really the borough's 6.3 allocation to the school district, can you just explain the difference between a mill and a million? Because for people who haven't been part of this conversation before, we're paying more than 1 million and 6.3 million.
Through the mayor to Assemblymember Bovee. So a mill is the unit of taxation. 1 mill equals, in this current budget, $9,886,000. That's the difference between a mill and $1 million.
Thank you.
So a mill is just right around, just shy of 10 million. Okay. Let's see, who's next? We got Mr. Sumner, then Ms. Nowers. Ms. Nowers, I guess you're up, Mr. Summers.
I just want to say that, we're going to make it work. I can tell all the kids, like, I'm surprised you haven't pulled out your phones yet on all this, but we're going to make it work somehow. If the school district comfortable with us promising payback, I don't think anybody doesn't think FEMA is going to come through. We just don't know when they're going to come through. Okay, all right. I'm comfortable with that. I'd also say, when you're building new, that's the time to maybe not be totally chintzy. I appreciate that Houston's willing to live with, the basics, but that's a time where you can do a little bit extra and it costs you a lot less than coming in after the fact. And we are a growing area. So I think there's a lot of ways we can make this work. I just want the school board members to know, as far as skin in the game, that I think this assembly, or at least in my time on it, we've been working really hard to deal with this school bond debt obligation. And that's 8.5 million to 17 million every year. So that's 8.5% to 17% of our area-wide budget. That's a huge hole year after year of it till 2035. And, it does go. I just want the school board to know that, at least for me, I'm committed to trying to work through that and insulate the school district from that portion of it. And for the people sitting here, my kids have been in portables when they were in school in elementary, and then they finally got a school, and portable is not a way to go. So I'm just personally committed to making this happen this year. 2 years has been way too long for it to, well, it's 2018, so you'd be looking at almost 3 years.
Okay, I think we're going to take what do you think, 8-minute, 10-minute recess break? Would that work with everybody? So let's recess here. It's about 8:05 and we'll come back at 8:15. Turn.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we're going to go back on record. The time is about 8:19 PM. We took a brief recess, 10, 15 minutes. We're talking about Houston Middle School, rebuilding the high school in Houston and funding. I am going to turn this to Mr. Manager Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, I appreciate the difficulty of this problem. I don't relish being in this position where we don't have a solution, and I don't love it that kids from Houston and the Houston community have to sit here and have to watch us try to figure this out. But the reality is it's a difficult problem. I wish FEMA would come through. I can't believe that it takes the federal government this long to get things done, but it shouldn't surprise anyone. I guess our request would be this, and what I would ask is if the school board would consider one of the concepts that was brought up tonight around forward funding. I think Mr. Hale spoke to it and indicated he would be supportive of that measure. The board can obviously choose not to do that, and the assembly has other options available to it. But I think we do have a little bit of time. What we tried to communicate in the letter was that we are reaching a decision point around bidding this project out. Because, you know, the cost of materials are going up. We want to stay on the timeline for an August 2022 delivery. We still have a little bit of play in that window. When we pitched the March 19th date, what we were building that from was a contract approval at the May 18th assembly meeting. That can slip a little bit. It can't slip a lot, but it can slip a little bit into June. So what I would ask at the next regular school board meeting, if the school board would be willing to consider a transfer with conditions that talk about reimbursement to the school district over time pending this FEMA determination and outcome. I appreciate that we have a ton of uncertainty and unknowns around what FEMA will determine to be eligible and what they'll reimburse. I get that. But that's the only option at this point to move, is to find the funding ourselves to move this project forward on time. Whether that comes from the school board, it would give you a bite at the apple. Whatever you all determine, you determine, and then the assembly can take action on that. That would be my request, I guess.
Mr. Hale?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just like to point out that, you know, if the school board and the school administration were willing to forward fund it, you know, through some type of loan that would be reimbursed or whatever, that would put you guys in the driver's seat. I mean, you could dictate some pretty good terms on your behalf in order to get this thing going. I think most folks up here would support, you know, giving you pretty good terms on how that money gets paid back and what other kind of extras or, you know, things might get thrown in that type of agreement. And I just think that really, the way I see it is we have two options, right? We can wait on FEMA and build the school sometime in the future, or, you know, the school district can loan us the money and we can get started on this summer. And so I just think the second option is much better.
Mr. McKee?
I would like to make it known that Mr. Hale does not speak for me.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, could I add just one point?
Sure.
Or thought or idea? And once again, this is me speaking and not the board. I just want to recognize that the borough is taking on some responsibility for this bond debt reimbursement, and that's a recurring problem year over year. And I do recognize that this assembly can't commit the future assembly from either paying that bond debt or leaving it at 6.3, or maybe even reimbursing us if we're able to move this money over. But I think I recognize that everybody in this room and all of you assembly members and board members, I know your character is of the strongest, and that we may not be able to, you know, sign a contract or whatever, but I think a resolution, even though you can't, you know, commit future assemblies to do any of those things, I don't know that we need to play hardball or look for extra. We just want to get the school built and have as much support from the assembly that we can, that, you know, there's risk involved and the assembly is willing to take some of that risk, recognizing you already are with the bond debt reimbursement. So I don't know that we need to negotiate much over terms. We should probably pick a time that makes the most sense for the borough as well as us. For instance, the bond debt reimbursement has a significant drop. I can't remember, 4 or 5 years from now. If everything fell apart and the state doesn't come through with the GO bonds and FEMA doesn't come through, maybe that's when the repayment could start.
Okay, I guess, Mr. Two, please.
How about a deal like the school pays for the project, and then when FEMA pays up, you just, whatever they pay is what you get? The school can start tomorrow.
I'm not going to say a word.
Mr. Mayor,
Is that Mr. Hart?
this is Member Taylor.
Oh, excuse me. Go ahead, sir.
I apologize for tuning in late to the meeting, but I've appreciated what I've heard so far. I've been involved in a project at another school district where the school burned down, and literally within a year, that borough and school district had that building replaced. And you know, it's a little bit embarrassing to all of us, I believe, that it's taken this long because of FEMA and whatever reasons. If we can go around a statute by making agreement, which it sounds like we can, let's do it right now. I know we probably need to meet as groups and do all that. But whatever it takes to get this school built tomorrow, we need to do. And it sounds like we're coming to some sort of agreement. So I hope we can do that very, very quickly. I, as a school board member, would happily vote to front the money, to upfront or whatever it takes to do it. I just want to go on record as saying that I would happily write that check out, not personally, but it just needs to happen. It's been too long. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brown, I guess you're thinking that $6 million should take us from 28 up to the construction point. That's what your request is, just to make sure it's clear.
That's through the mayor, or to the mayor. Yes, that's correct. And then to be clear, like we talked about, because we've talked about the cost of materials and all those things, that allows us to fund verify, like Ms. Heindel was discussing, put it out to bid, and we'll see where the bids are. Of course, I would love to be optimistic. We don't have a lot of, or any large, that large commercial construction projects in the valley ongoing right now. So I do think we're in a highly competitive environment. We just have to deal with the issues of the cost of materials, which is just a reality.
Okay, unless there's anything further, we're going to close out that discussion on the Houston Middle School. At this point in time, some decisions are going to have to be made over at the school district and school board, and then based on that decision, the Matsu Borough Assembly could take the matter back up and decide how to proceed. You'll either have the $6 million or you won't. And FEMA is we will not quit trying to get FEMA to fund the project to the full extent of what we think they should fund. But that's a little bit more difficult premise and timely. So, okay. So we're done with that agenda item. We'll go on to update the school, the borough road construction and future road projects near schools. So Mr. Dolan, please.
Terry Dolan again from Public Works. The school board requested information on road projects this summer near the schools. And
Mr.
so,
Dolan, let's hang on a second. We'll just say goodbye to Houston tonight here. So thank you folks for coming in and listening. Okay. Go Hawks, right?
looking at on the big screen, and for folks in the audience, if you'd like to have one, there's a stack of them on the table right outside the door out here. So this is complicated, but the simple answer to the question of what we're going to be building near your schools this summer, the only project on this list that I expect to go into construction this summer is Alex Drive, which is down by the Reddington School, just south of Knickknack Mud Shack. Map there under item number 1. That's a pavement job, 20-foot wide pavement mat with 2-foot shoulders on either side, and it'll improve access in there to the school areas. You see just north of that, Knickknack Mud Shack Road is also scheduled for pavement. Alex was actually designed last year and will be constructing it this year. We don't have a design yet for Knickknack Mud Shack Road, but that'll be in design this year, and I expect we'll pave that also this summer. And just in case you were wondering, you see this white gap in between those two purple lines on Alex and Knickknack Mud Shack, and you might wonder why we're not paving across that whole thing. Well, that little white segment in there is already paved. We actually received a lot of complaints about school traffic creating dust when it turned off of Carmel, which is paved, and onto Knickknack Mud Shack Road. And that's what really drove the Road Service Area Board to agree to the project to pave Knickknack Mud Shack. So that's all that's going on down there, and Alex is the only project this summer. We listed a lot of other projects on here as well, just so that you're aware of them. You see the little school crossing symbol on there. Those are sites where your Safe Routes to School plan really needs to be implemented with things like crosswalks and pedestrian pathways. Those were part of a bond proposal that was approved by the borough voters, but we have yet to receive match money for those. So they're not underway yet, but the reason I wanted them on here is I think there's a reasonable possibility that you could see road service areas, especially in the core area, fund the match money for those projects, especially the smaller ones. The core area road service areas are relatively well funded compared to the service areas on the periphery. So the one that you see up there in the upper left corner up in Talkeetna, I think it's very unlikely that the road service area will be able to fund half of that project. But here in the core area, I think it's far more likely, and we'll be working on that over the next couple of years, see if we can get the RSAs to fund those. Some of those road bond projects that are on here, you see in green, for example, 106 up there in the upper left, the Selden Road extension. And there's a number of others on here, the 104, the bridge at the end of Trunk Road, and 101, Hammer Road. Those are projects that were approved in the bond passed by the voters here a couple of years ago that the state of Alaska has agreed to provide us match money for out of their community transportation program funds. This is federal money, comes from the Federal Highway Administration, and the state will execute that on our behalf. And the manager told me this week that the intent is to sell bonds to cover the borough's half of that this fall, and then we'll pass that off to the state for execution. We actually have maintenance agreements in place with the state already for 3 of the 4 projects that the state is going to execute, and the last one we're working the final details on right now. So I think it's very likely that you'll see the state go through the design processes and prepare to execute those in subsequent years. Executing federal money is far more complicated than executing borough money. And so the state's processes to do that take more time than our processes do. But you'll see those projects, I think, come to fruition in the next couple of years. And that's all I would point out at this point, pending your questions.
President Larson and then Mr. Probasco.
For the last couple years, if not longer, since I've been on this board, there's been a question about Career Tech, Teelan, and Frontiers School and crosswalk and kids walking down the street. And I don't see that on your list.
So that project that you're talking about, I believe, is the project to extend Seward Meridian Parkway across Bogard and all the way, across Bogard and all the way up to Selden. And that essentially will connect those schools all the way to the Parks Highway and to the Palmer-Wasilla Highway. Right now, most of the traffic comes into those schools off of Selden, and the traffic is absolutely horrendous in there. We recently paved Tate and a number of roads that you see in the area just to the east of those schools, and traffic does flow through the residential area into those schools, although the residents out there We're very concerned about the speed of that traffic, and we ended up putting a lot of speed humps in there to slow it down, but there is better traffic flow in there now than there was in the past. But the problem won't be solved until Seward Meridian is extended, and that's a State of Alaska project, not a borough project. So you won't see it on my update sheet here. But if you're interested in it, you can take a look at State of Alaska Central Region's website under their project listing, and they've got lots of details there. It's very easy to find with Google.
But we have kids walking on that. There's no sidewalks. They're walking on the street, either leaving Teelan, Currituck, or Fronteras. And we've talked about this over the last couple of years, and they're still walking through the snow with all that traffic going on. There's no place, there's no path for them. Nothing is plowed for them. They either walk on the street or they walk through the snow. And we've talked over and over that it's a hazard for kids crossing those streets and walking from Fronteras to Currituck or so forth and so on. And there's nothing that you're saying we can do as a borough or a school district in an unsafe area.
Yeah,
I don't mean to put you on the spot. But
I don't think I'm saying that. Certainly the road service area has some ability to provide upgrade projects and that type of things. The execution of your Safe Routes to Schools plan is certainly a way to mitigate these problems. One of the problems that we've had in the past is we've gone out and bonded for new schools, and we haven't bonded for the associated facilities to safely bring traffic in there and to bring students in there. And so one of the things we can do to prevent that from happening in the future is when we add a new school, we need a parallel bond package that's designed to provide the facilities to safely bring traffic and pedestrians in and out of there. I think it's a huge failure in the past. We certainly are paying for that to a large degree, and like down on Nelson Road where Mockingtons is. When that school first went in there, there was one residential street that led into that whole subdivision, Abbey Boulevard, that crosses the railroad tracks down there. And it was like that for years until we finally were able to get the bridge across the railroad tracks on South Trunk Road and help bring a second method of getting traffic in and out of there. But it's a great example, just like that area you're talking about, where we failed to plan for the pedestrian traffic and the vehicular traffic that's associated with putting a new school in. Could we make some improvements up there with crosswalks and whatnot? Yes, we certainly could. And if you have a Safe Routes to School plan for those facilities up there, I'm happy to carry those kinds of things to the Road Service Area Board of Supervisors so that they can examine them and see what's in the realm of the possible with the funding that they have available.
The good news is that Mr. Amundson from DOT just spoke to us 2 weeks ago to the Assembly and gave us an update. Seward Meridian, this section they're talking about, the extension, is going to be constructed this summer. That's a big step forward for the state of Alaska to get that road in front of those schools. Now, this other stuff, the paths and things like that, we certainly want to follow up on that. But that's really good news.
I do know that they are planning for the crosswalks and associated facilities that are necessary there. So, that'll be an improvement when they do that. And also you'll see some reduction in the how backed up the traffic is up there once Seward Meridian is connected in.
I've picked up kids up there that, there's only one or two ways in, and it's going to be very interesting to see what DOT does, because that traffic is horrendous when 3 schools start letting out. It is just jammed. And
Yes,
much
sir.
less have the traffic that goes up Tate or goes around the roundabout to get onto Selden. You had that traffic during that peak period and then schools letting out. It's going to be interesting to see how they do that without jamming up the schools so people can't even get out of the schools. That would be interesting to see their plans for that. Maybe you guys, if you come across those plans or they're presented to you, just send them over to us so we can take a look at it and maybe help develop that safe school pathway for kids.
What I would offer is that DOT has been very forthcoming with information when we request it. And if you would like to see the project manager for that project talk about their plans, perhaps at your next school board meeting, I think that could be arranged.
Then arrange it. I'd love to see that. We'll put it on our agenda.
I will get an email out to DOT here tonight.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Dolan? Mr. Pasco?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Borough. Is there a conversation about addressing Wasilla Fishhook in the intersection with Shaw Elementary for possible turning lanes?
So again, I believe that's a state of Alaska roadway. And I can't talk to the specifics of it, but I think it would be a great question for DOT's representative if we can get them to your next school board meeting.
Other questions for Mr. Dolan? On the road to schools?
I don't have a question, just a statement. I think pathways and lighting is very important. Whenever we do any kind of improvement in our community, we should pay attention to that.
I do have one question. Maybe you don't have the answer, and maybe somebody does. Is our day school going to empty into Seward Meridian and come off of Tate? Because Tate was supposed to be temporary. Or is Tate going to be a permanent place for day school and not the other way around? Because at one time I was told that the entry into the day school was temporary. Is that going to stay there and not go away? Does anybody know?
Through the mayor to Mr. Larson, from my understanding of the plans for Seward Meridian, the driveway entry for day school will continue to be on Tate. There won't be a road completely across to the west to connect that in.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Larson? Do you have any idea where Kanak, Mud Shack, where'd that name come from? I just kind of wondered.
I have a lot of information on it if you really want to know.
Go ahead.
Connect Mud Shack was they did pottery. That was the mud, you know about it too. And it was, the road into it was owned by them, and so they named it that. And I think it was on part of a homestead out there. And in order for you to get there and go get your pottery and get it fired, they named the road that. And guess what? It's stuck.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it was,
Well, that's, with that name, they need priority, and you paved that this summer, okay?
it was Bud Longnecker's.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Yeah.
now I got you. Okay, great name. Thank you, Mr. Dolan. We appreciate it. Okay, we're at comments. I'll turn this over to President Larson to go through the school board, please.
Member Hart? Comments?
I'm sorry, say again?
We're doing our ending comments, similar to what we do at the school board.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Do you have any
I had a hard
comments?
time hearing.
Did you say you had any comments?
Yeah, I'm just looking forward to being able to rebuild Houston. You know, it's all borough money in the end, but you know, let's spend education money on education, but let's also spend borough money on the building, on the structures as is appropriate. It's a borough structure ultimately, not a school district structure. So, but let's all, you know, put our heads together and get that money where it needs to go to get that structure started. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Taylor?
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank the parents and students that came out tonight. It's obvious, you know, when you listen to them, you can tell that they truly have a desire to have that built and would truly appreciate it and treat it right. And it would be a wonderful addition for the community out here. it'd be one of those things that could completely transform the area and make the community a happier, better place. So I'm excited about that. I appreciate, coming up with a better understanding of the law, the statute. I'm excited to come to an agreement and get that taken care of as soon as possible. And I appreciate all the efforts gone into that. So thank you.
Member Berge?
I agree with the previous two board members. We need to come to an agreement and get that building going. That's all.
Member Welton?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak about these things. I appreciate everybody being here tonight and discussing these things. I will support a legal ramification, something that fixes the legal issues, that we resolve that. And the school needs to be built and it needs to be on schedule. In my high school days, many, many years ago, we had a split session because they were constructing the school. And it was horrific for all the students involved in that, and the families and all the disruptions. And I know that we need to accommodate all the students. And while my district is Wasilla, I still have several areas that are Houston areas. So they are my students too, and all students in the district are my students. We need to support them all. I want to thank everybody for the presentations and the discussion. Thank you.
Member Pavasco?
Thank you. For addressing the school bond debt reimbursement. That's very helpful. And then no decisions made tonight on the Houston school, but I think anyway, and I think the rest of the board kind of knows which direction we need to walk in, to get this school online. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for having us tonight. I appreciate it, and I appreciated the little bit of discussion we had prior to the meeting. It was a lively meeting. A lot got discussed, and I think we're still in a somewhat cooperative organization. That's just jest. I'm glad we get along okay. This school will be built. I have no doubt about it, and it needs to get those kids out of the portables. Thank you.
Okay, Assembly members, Assemblymember McKee, you want a few comments, or it looks good, Mr. Two's comments?
I think it's important that we get the school built. We've already went 2 years. I have a lot of really good memories about being in high school, and I know what it means to the kids and their futures. And I think we come up with quite a few little solutions tonight to make this project go forward very quickly if we desire to do so. Thank you.
Mr. Hale?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank the board and the administration of the school district for being here tonight and for having all their good input and good questions and good answers. And I just want to note that there aren't a whole lot of large, heavy civil projects going on right now. So if we can get this out to bid, I'm sure the contractors will be sharpening up their pencils real tight and trying to edge each other out to get this job. And so I think our costs are going to come in quite a bit lower than we think they are due to the lack of big projects going on at this time. So thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Sumner, comments?
Yep. I'd just like to point out there's no borough money or school district money. There's just taxpayer money, So there's really, it's hard to justify while holding a fund balance, not going forward with what is essentially just a cash flow problem at this point. We should build the school, and I believe that the school district would be made whole over the long run if they facilitated the construction by appropriating some of their fund balance, their surplus fund balance. So thank you.
Ms. Nowers?
Thank you. I just want to thank the school board for being here tonight and the community for turning out. I'm glad, it sounds like we have a path forward for getting this done this year. And I hope somebody will make another call to FEMA and check with them what calendar they're using and see if we can get them to commit to a date and give us an answer. And just wanted to second the idea when we're doing schools that we think about the ways that people are getting there and that there's a pathway for the kids and there's lights included in that. And that's something we do just automatically with these projects. Thank you.
Building on what Jessie said, it seems like a little game of tug of war, but really at the end of the day, we're all in this together, right? So we all are taxpayers. We've all had kids, nieces, nephews, whatever it may be, grow up here, and we're gonna have many more. So we're all in this together. I think we're gonna work through this quickly. The good news is too, whatever agreement we come to, I realize I just wanted to point out legally earlier that we can't marry a future assembly to a decision, but 6 of the 7 assembly members up here are in their first term, and they're all amazing people. And I'm sure most, if not all of us, will hopefully be back eventually. So I think we're gonna have a good working relationship moving forward, and whatever we come to, we're all men and women of honor. We'll stick to our word, so. Thanks.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Bill Stoltz for this jar of honey. I need a little sweetness tonight, and thank you. My wife will really appreciate it because she loves tea, and so thank you. You know, the Houston Middle School, the first time I set foot in it after the earthquake in 2018, I knew it was doomed. You know, we had 3 proposals come over from the school district right off the bat. I know kind of a repair, 11, 12, $13 million, and then kind of a mid-range, 30 million, and then kind of a total rebuild, 58. I can't remember the total numbers. I don't know what we spent to totally tear this building down and destroy it, but that was the best interest of the community, best interest of the long term for the Mat-Su School District and the borough to have a school rebuilt, a new high school in Houston that will go on for another 30, 40 years. And I realize this is a tough situation. 2 years later, we're still at the point of construction. So I hope we can get to that $6 million so we can get the bids out right away. And then we'll deal with that as it comes along, but to build it is what's important right now. I did start out, I think I mentioned this at the last joint meeting, I think it was my first month. We had Sioux Valley High School. It totally burned down. And it was a couple of years, I think Miss Welton was there, and probably Ole Larson. It was a couple of years to get all the insurance in. And I want to thank the borough staff for working to get that insurance. The $15 million proceeds that came in, and then the secondary policy that was brought in, the amount of money to use for the rebuilding of the school. And so I hope, the school bond debt did change the school district and the Mat-Su Borough. Tell you the truth, we were on there 70-30. Things were moving very smoothly when we went to the 6.3 mills operating money. Then all of a sudden, I think it was Governor Walker did a $5.7 million cut on the school bond debt, which we could handle. We handled that internally. And then later on, it's getting more serious. And so I'm very hopeful with the governor's budget that he put in 50% in the governor's budget. That allows the Mat-Su Borough to budget so that your operating money at 6.3 mils will come through. Now, if the governor changes that or the legislature changes that, that's what happens politically. So but I'm hopeful. He had it in his budget. That's something new. He didn't have it in there last year. And but the Houston Middle School just needs to be built. And this is what it takes. It takes $6 million to get to your construction number of 34 million. And I realize that you got to put, chairs and desks and things like that in there, but at least we get this out to being built. And we'll deal with that as it comes up. And it's in the best interest of the students, the best interest of the Mat-Su Borough and the school district. And I want to thank you, Dr. Traney, for all the help you've been doing and work on this. And I know sometimes, just like with assembly, I never know what they're going to do. And I imagine you don't know what the school board's going to do, but you provide really great guidance, I think. And thank you, Mr. Brown, for the same thing. And we appreciate that. And all our staffs with the school district and the Mat-Su Borough for all the extra work that goes along with a project like this. And so one thing else, you want me to talk, I forgot the deputy clerk, didn't I? Deputy mayor. Did you have anything to say?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll turn it all over to you, then I'll start over again.
Sorry, everybody. Yeah, I don't have anything new to say, but Houston junior senior is in my district, so I want to get on the record here. I do want to thank the Hawks for showing up, for speaking up. They have been patiently waiting for a school that they absolutely need as soon as possible. And I will be the first to admit that that responsibility falls on both the school district and the assembly. I'm not going to point fingers. This is a conversation that's been ongoing. We'll work it out together. I very much appreciate everyone who was here tonight. I think we're headed in the right direction. Yeah, I'm hopeful that we can begin construction shortly. Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
For the assembly members, I just wanted to let you know, I did hand out my budget tonight. If you read at least the memo that's on top, it's a page and a half, and it goes through every single change I made in the budget. Very simple. Any backup documentation's in the back, but if you have any questions, please let me know.
Are you asking for a salary reduction?
No, just a normal step increase, Mr. Mayor,
Okay,
if should the assembly decide.
I didn't want to put her on the spot. Okay, so nothing else. It's a pleasure meeting with the school board. I realize sometimes it gets to be a little friction, but let's move on without that and just deal with the issue before us and build Houston Middle School. And so thank you very much to everybody, and we'll adjourn this meeting at looks like 8:54 p.m.